Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon on June 7th, 2026 for Reason to Resist. Well, as I and many others in the anti-imperialist media predicted months ago, the hot war between the United States and Israel, otherwise known as the Epstein regime on the one side and Iran on the other, has erupted again. And we're no longer talking about a low-intensity conflict, I can assure you, because Iran has finally, after showing much patience with the Epstein regime, launched True Promise 5. And I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. What brought us to this point? What brought us to this point is that Israel, with the full support of the United States in every conceivable respect, legal support, economic support, military support, intelligence support, has violated 6 ways from Sunday no less than 3 ceasefires pertaining to Lebanon. The ceasefire entered into in November 2024. The ceasefire between Israel's principal sponsor, the United States, and Iran entered into in the first half of April. And another ceasefire entered into 2 days ago and supposedly mediated by the United States, even though the United States is a co-belligerent and is in fact driving the genocidal war on Lebanon. So 3 ceasefires violated over and over again, and perhaps the most provocative of those violations by Israel occurred yesterday, about 15 kilometers from where I and my colleagues at Free Palestine TV were reporting in South Lebanon, when Israel destroyed a vehicle with a drone strike that was carrying a general, a brigadier general in the Lebanese National Army by the name of Wissam Sabra, who is a Sunni Muslim, and a captain in the Lebanese National Army by the name of Eli Khoury, who is a Christian, and a private who is a Shia. So at least Israel, in its latest act of barbarism, didn't discriminate between these various communities that make up, or largely make up, the diverse country of Lebanon. In any case, I could go on and on about Israel's violations just in the last 48 hours alone, many of which I have reported myself. For example, today, I and my Free Palestine TV colleagues, and along with my comrade from Reason to Resist, Rami Yahya, we were at the southern tip of the Bekaa Valley at a lake, a human-made lake by the name of Karanun. It was created by a dam and feeds into the Litani River. And we witnessed ourselves an airstrike by Israel on a peaceful village from which there was no military activity. We observed the village for a full hour before the airstrike occurred. It's a village called Sokhmor, and this is what we saw. Now, since arriving here about 4 days ago, I've myself documented numerous other violations, extreme violations of the ceasefire by Israel. I was, for example, in a village in the south of Lebanon yesterday called Saksakia, in which the Israelis, with 2 airstrikes, murdered a grandmother, her daughter, and 3 Syrian workers, and injured also 4 family members of the murdered grandmother. I just published that report earlier today. There was absolutely no military justification for murdering these civilians, some of whom weren't even Lebanese. As I said, 3 of them were just Syrian laborers who were just scraping by in the country. And for no possible, logical reason, Israel decided to wipe them off the face of the earth. And I was the first foreign journalist who arrived there. I don't even know if any other foreign journalists went to the scene, frankly. But you can see my report. And, I was also in Sur 2 days ago and reported on the near destruction of a hospital by the genocidal Israeli regime, and the destruction of banking facilities. I could, again, continue to recite these violations that I myself have documented and witnessed just in the 4 days that I've been here. And so throughout it all, even though Trump has been posturing as somebody who is trying to restrain the fucking crazy Netanyahu, those are the words that Trump supposedly used, according to Barak Ravid of Axios, in a heated conversation with Netanyahu. The reality is that Trump is fully on board, has no problem whatsoever justifying, supporting, enabling these grotesque ceasefire violations and war crimes and crimes against humanity by Israel. And I haven't even gotten into all the civilians who have been slaughtered, including children being burned alive in Gaza over the last several days. So finally, Iran had enough. It was entirely predictable that it would have enough. But the thing that really pushed it over the edge was after issuing a warning that it would strike Israel and that any of the colonists living in the north of occupied Palestine would have to evacuate if they wanted to save themselves in the event that Israel struck Dahieh. Israel did, in fact, strike Dahieh. And it happened to do that today when we were out in the southern tip of the Bekaa Valley documenting that ceasefire violation on Sokhmor. This is the drone strike that Israel launched into Dahieh today. One more time. Now, predictably, this drone strike, like so many of Israel's barbaric attacks, killed innocent civilians in Dahieh, which the corporate media in the West and Western governments love to describe as the Hezbollah stronghold, as though that somehow justifies Israel's heinous crimes against the civilian population living there. And so Iran reacted immediately and with extreme prejudice, shall we say. I'll show you just one comment. There were numerous comments from senior Iranian leaders. This is from the parliamentary speaker and the lead negotiator for Iran, Mr. Bagar Ghalibaf. He stated, "They are neither committed to a ceasefire nor believe in dialogue, and by demonstrated through the naval blockade in violation of agreements regarding Lebanon, that they only understand the language of power. Two, the naval blockade against the Iranian nation and America's green light today to the Zionist regime turned American and regime bases and assets in the region into legitimate targets. The hand of our armed forces is open as always." Now, there is plenty of evidence that Iran has now launched what it describes as True Promise 5, which is exactly what it said it would do if Israel struck Dahieh. So Israel knew exactly what it was getting itself into. So too did the United States. And yet they struck Dahieh on top of all the other crimes and ceasefire violations they are committing, which can only lead you to one logical inference, and that is that they wanted to provoke a reaction from Iran and resume the full-blown hot war, which will almost certainly end in disaster for the region and will quite probably plunge the global economy into a severe recession, if not an outright depression for a prolonged period of time. This is where we're at. We've been predicting here on Reason to Resist for months. I'm very sorry to be right about this. I would have loved to have been wrong about it. I mean that in all sincerity with all my heart. But when the writing is on the wall, we have an obligation to read the writing to our audience, and that's what we tried to do here on Reason to Resist, as did other fine journalists in the alternative media. And so what is going on now? Well, there is video evidence of launches. Apparently, there have been already 3 waves, although I can't confirm that, of missiles and drones heading towards occupied Palestine, the north of occupied Palestine, from Iran. And in fact, a video has surfaced of Iranians in the streets celebrating missiles passing overhead towards the genocidal entity. As you may have seen, that video was published courtesy of the Iranian media outlet Mer News, and to provide confirmation that these are in fact missiles heading towards occupied Palestine. The Israeli military has published, or there's a map of sirens that have sounded in northern occupied Palestine. There are numerous such maps that have been published. Interestingly, they are not apparent. Just if these red dots are an accurate indication of where the incoming projectiles from Iran are headed, they don't appear to be aimed at settlements that are immediately along the border of occupied Palestine and Lebanon. And that may be because the Iranians don't want to put at risk Lebanese in the very south of Lebanon, the few that remain. This seems to be a stretch target. The target seems to be a stretch of land from Haifa in the north of occupied Palestine on the Mediterranean coast up to Lake Tiberias. And then there's a band of land between the border and Safed in the north of occupied Palestine, which does not appear, at least based upon these maps and the sirens that are being sounded, to have been targeted. Now, where do we go from here? That is the all-important question. I think my sense is, even though there have been 3 waves, I suspect that this isn't going to be designed, this particular set of waves of True Promise 5, to deliver some kind of a devastating blow to Israel. I think that consistently with the approach that Iran has taken to provocations by the United States in the Persian Gulf, it is going to attempt to inflict damage on Israel that is greatly disproportionate to the damage that it inflicted on Dahieh today, but that is not designed to immediately lead to a full resumption of the hot war. However, knowing, as we all do, how Netanyahu and Trump behave, the likely reaction of this strike on Israel is going to be ferocious. And again, I'd love to be wrong about that, but based upon their long and ignominious record of extreme violence and unspeakable levels of arrogance and megalomania, I would expect that their response will be designed to be far more destructive than this response, and we're going to quickly climb up the escalation ladder and find ourselves back into a full-blown hot war. Let me talk for just a second about what this is going to mean potentially for Lebanon, where I'm currently situated. And I say this out of concern for my brothers and sisters here in Lebanon. You know, I am privileged to be able to leave. I don't plan to do that anytime soon. I'm going to stay here for at least a couple of more days. I had planned to remain here until the 10th of June, and I'm not going to leave any sooner than that, I can assure you. And if possible, I'll remain longer. But I'm concerned about the well-being of my brothers and sisters here, and I suspect that now that Iran has launched these waves of strikes on Israel, Israel will say it's taking off the gloves with respect to Beirut, and it will begin to bomb Beirut, and particularly the southern suburb of Dahieh, mercilessly within the next 48 hours. But beyond that, we can be, I think, reasonably sure at this stage that we are back into a hot war, which may or may not last long. It may just be a very intense but short series of exchanges of fire, which do very significant damage on both sides, but which ultimately lead to a cooling of temperatures. Or we could get into a level of destruction that surpasses our imagination and is far beyond what we saw in the months of March and in the month of March and in the first half of April. Whatever the ultimate outcome may be in the near term of Israel's relentless provocations with the full support of the United States, I think we are going to see some real turmoil now in commodities markets, not just in the oil market, but in commodities markets generally, and especially the oil market and the gas market. And all of this manipulation that has been reasonably successful in suppressing the price of oil during this period of time, at least in the futures market, is going to prove itself to be ineffectual at this stage. A lot of wishful thinking is about to be exploded, I would imagine, and we are heading into an extraordinarily painful and dangerous period, I fear to say. Let us hope that some sense and rationality manages to finally prevail in the halls of Western power. I'm not going to hold my breath. Based on their records, I would expect them to descend into ever more ferocious exhibitions of savagery and irrationality in the days ahead. And I'm not just talking here about the United States and Israel. I'm talking about the entire collective West, including, yes, the grotesque fraud known as Mark Carney, Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, as I like to call him, who has been, along with his disgraceful Foreign Minister Anita Anand, a former law professor, shameless cheerleaders for this criminal war of aggression. On that basis alone, they should be turfed out of office. They should resign in disgrace. But no, they're riding high in the polls. At least we can say, with respect to France, Britain, Germany, that the voters there have a good sense to give a very, very low approval rating to their leaders, Merz, Starmer, and Macron. They're all in the teens as far as approval ratings go. So most people in those countries seem to have realized that they are led by frauds, charlatans, buffoons, and incompetent maniacs. Unfortunately, those of us who come from Canada, who hail from Canada, at least most of Canadians, don't seem to have gotten religion just yet on the depraved and degenerate nature of their leadership. In any case, we will continue to report to you about what is happening in this region. And my thoughts and my compassion and my solidarity go out to all the peoples of the region for the difficult days ahead. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon on June 7th, 2026.